Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 40,000 and some of the spicier information that Chapter Master Valrak revealed in his latest video on the subject. He did reveal quite a number of things, like what factions we're going to have, how we're going to have a Galactic War mode inspired by Helldivers 2, and when I say Galactic War mode, I mean specifically the Galaxy part, not the third-person shooting part. And that's also been made clear to Valrak, though. Even his first video, it seemed very clear to me, no, Total War is not going to have a third-person mode, it's going to be a strategy game, but it's going to have that Galactic Conquest Galactic campaign. Now, whether or not that mode ends up being the main mode, or a separate mode from single player, that remains to be seen. That is going to be a big discussion point. Suffice to say, I think that if they go with that as the main mode, they're going to have a storm of fire and fury, the likes of which they have never seen before as the developer. Both CA and Games Workshop, suffice to say, on that subject. But regardless, Valrak talked about how he was told that Space Marines are going to be customizable. And he was given an example of the Daemon Prince, Daniel, in Warhammer 3. Now, why do we call him Daniel? Well, that's because Creative Assembly used the name Daniel for marketing, specifically before Immortal Empires came out, if I recall correctly. I don't think it was with Realms of Chaos, I believe it was Immortal Empires. Yes, CA's marketing was not the best back then. And it did show, by the way. But regardless, I'm sure many of you that have played Total War Warhammer 3 cringe at the idea of having another Daemon Prince campaign in a Total War game. Not because of the customization aspect, but because how it sucks. But before I go into the details on how I think they could do it, and how I think they could do it well, and why they might want to do it in a Total War 40k game, I do need to mention some things, just to specify this. So I've said that if we're going to have a Galactic War inspired by Helldivers, it is that Galactic campaign with events, objectives, etc., co-op, or even playing on your own, but contributing to a larger campaign. That's a critical point. The other thing that gets brought up by a lot of people is like, well, do you think the engine could handle it? I don't really think the issue with a Total War 40k game is the engine whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, I do want CA to use a better engine. A completely new one, just throw out the old. Because the problem they have right now in Warhammer 3 is that the engine was built for Warhammer 1. Or rather, they've built a gameplay and a campaign system and various systems for Warhammer 3 and based on things that were done in Warhammer 1. And it shows. That's the reason we have imbalance. That's the reason we have so many bad design things in Warhammer 3. And there's also technical debt, because apparently they're struggling to add new stuff to it. Like, if you remember back in the day how long it took them to add Norska from Warhammer 1 to Warhammer 2. So there's issues over here. But I think the engine itself can run much better. You look at Troy, you look at Pharaoh, they actually do run much better than Warhammer 3. Hell, even Three Kingdoms, in many ways, has its own advantages versus Warhammer 3. So you do have the technical debt. I think the engine can support it. It can support the campaign, clearly. And it can support battles. The problem with battles is not that the engine can't support gunfights. It can. We have Gatling guns, we have tanks, we have flying units, we have monsters. That's not the problem. It's the specifics of balance, specifics of unit interaction, and the way the maps are designed. Because we have these empty maps. We would need bigger maps, but with a lot of detail. But that's a subject for another video, though. Apparently, from what Valrak was told, it's going to be more like Company of Heroes, in the sense that, yes, we will have stuff on it, we will have cover, potentially. I would certainly hope on a much bigger scale. So, my perspective when 40k was first talked about is what I believed would be the best option for CA. Take Dawn of War 2, scale up by 10, 20 times, and that's your gameplay. That's what you can use. And it would work. very well. Like, when I say Dawn of War 2, I mean, think of Dawn of War 2 Retribution without the base building, without unit building, but the kind of battle gameplay that you have in that game. Obviously improve it, all that, but... and add bigger scale, bigger maps, not the narrow corridors we had in Dawn of War 2. So that's my perspective on it. But now let's talk about Daniel, because many of us who've played Total War... well, let me just say it. Daniel's campaign is so bad in Warhammer 3 that you don't even consider it on tier lists anymore. It's its own category. The Changeling is the most awful campaign in Warhammer 3, but at least it's a campaign. Daniel doesn't have a campaign. He's not even a legendary lord from my perspective. He does have customization, but it's done in a very, very poor way. Like many other things were done at the release of Realms of Chaos. I gotta say, the people who made Realms of Chaos, I would say they did some good things, diplomacy, etc., but they really, really fucked it up in terms of faction design, race design, unit design, etc. And Daniel is the worst case. Because he's supposed to be this legendary lord that you customize, but he just flat out doesn't work within the systems that Warhammer 3 has. Within the systems that Warhammer 3 had at launch. In fact, within the systems that any Total War game has ever had, he just flat out doesn't work. And the reason he doesn't work, he doesn't really have faction effects, he doesn't have a lord skill line, he doesn't have an item tab, he doesn't have a research tree, he has demonic glory, he doesn't trade, he has limited, he has severe limitations on many things. And this is actually the better version. He was actually worse at launch because he would instantly declare war on Order factions. He has improved it by a bit, but it's still a problem. Also, this is the kind of faction where if you play it without any DLC, it is pure misery, because it's the toy box faction. It's the faction that you get all kinds of units from different Chaos factions, but that only works if you own Champions of Chaos, if you own various DLCs for the game. By default, it's just like, go Khorne for units, and then go every other god for heroes. But you can't ignore other gods. The reason you can't ignore other gods is because you need glory with those other gods, and you need to get provinces, because you dedicate the province to a particular god, in order to unlock heroes. If we look at a Warhammer game that did do this much better, we can look at Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. You could dedicate worlds to a particular god, and you would get various bonuses from that, but you still had your core roster available to you with that, and you didn't have things locked behind the glory meter. And also for Daniel himself, him having customizable item parts, yeah, you can make him look different, but he's actually weaker in combat than virtually every other legendary lord in the game, and he's actually even weaker than a generic lord who can wear items. His skill line is also just flat out terrible in every way, shape, or form. He gets some faction benefits, yes, but most of the benefits he gets affect himself, upkeep for certain units, his economy is bad, so there's a bunch of design decisions that were just flat out bad with him, and also bad balancing decisions that were also bad with him. So it's a combination of bad economy, bad mechanics, bad balancing of those mechanics that all lead to his campaign being pure misery. But why would Creative Assembly want to make a customizable character for a campaign? Here's my perspective on this. We know it's very likely going to be Primaris Marines, right? It could be Horus Heresy, but it's either Horus Heresy, which I'm a bit skeptical on that, but it could be Horus Heresy, or it very well could be Primaris Marines. That's the big selling point right now. Space Marine 2 had Primaris Marines, all that. Dawn of War 4 is going to have Primaris Marines. So I think Primaris, the Primaris Marines era, is the most sensible one. Sensible, logical, whatever. And if you look at the Primaris era of Space Marines, we look at the Indomitus Crusade. The Crusade led by Guilliman. So if they were to do a playable character with customization, they would do Guilliman. Now, he would be an Ultramarine, but you would have customization across your faction. Why is that? Because under Guilliman, during the Indomitus Crusade, we had the Unnumbered Sons, the Grey Shields. What those were Space Marines of different heritages. So you had Imperial Fists, you had Salamanders, you had Ultramarines, Blood Angels, so on and so forth, but all together in a Legion level force. Not a chapter, a Legion level force. So you would have Imperial Fists fighting side by side with Blood Angels, with other chapters, and then eventually that force, Guilliman had all those forces together with him, and he started leaving them behind on planets as the Crusade was moving on. So you could see a kind of idea. It's like, okay, we start with this force, and our goal is to reestablish control over the Imperium, leave forces behind. And that is similar to the Daemon Prince in the perspective that when you're taking territory, you dedicate it to a particular god. So as opposed to dedicating it to a god, you would give a world to one particular chapter, or a chapter of a specific heritage. So you would have like an Ultramarine world, or you'd have an Imperial Fist world with pros and cons. That could work, I suppose. Again, there's issues with that even when the Daemon Prince campaign, but I don't think the idea is so pushing it beyond what is acceptable. It's more of a balance issue how the Daemon Prince worked from that perspective. My point is, the guy leading your Legendary Lord should be a fixed character, or if he's not a fixed character, it should be one you customize before the beginning of the campaign. Though I think, having Guilliman as the playable character would be the best option available for Creative Assembly. He's the big character right now. We also have Lionel Johnson, of course, but I think that makes more sense in a DLC situation. But yeah, you could have various Space Marine chapters with their individual campaigns, and then you could have the Toy Box faction, which would be Guilliman, and the Indomitus Crusade, with all kinds of different Space Marines with all the forces available. So you would have like how they did it in Warhammer 3, because like in Warhammer 3, we did have the Mono God faction, so we had Slaanesh, Nurgle, Siege, Khorne, and then we had the Daemon Prince, which was combining all of them. So that's one way they could do it, but I think there is a much better way of doing it, as opposed to trying to recreate this abject failure of a campaign that never worked and never will work, I think, unless CA completely redesigns it. Now, sure, the only reason this campaign works is that you can get all the Regiments Renown of Chaos, DLC, and free stuff. But even then, it's got a lot of different issues. The armies you have aren't the most powerful. The Legendary Lord himself is not the most powerful. It's like you are not master of anything. You don't even have as much flexibility because the baseline roster you have as the Daemon Prince is not really that good. Exactly. Except Khorne. That's its own discussion. The much better way that Creative Assembly could do it, especially if what Valerac is saying is true, that Space Marines are not really going to occupy territory, they're going to have a ship, they're going to go from planet to planet, which harkens back to the point about the Indomitus Crusade, they could use Warriors of Chaos. I know, using a Chaos faction as a reference point for how they should do the Imperium is a bit silly, but it could work very well, provided they fix some of the issues that Warriors of Chaos do have. But here's the reason why Warriors of Chaos would work very well for Space Marines. First off, you have the upgrade system. So you have the idea that you start with units of a certain quality, so you could start with Scouts, and then you can upgrade them to full Battle Brothers. So you would have the idea that your units actually gain veterancy, you're getting things like Terminators, and later on in a campaign, you can actually get flat-out high-end units with it once you've upgraded your ship or your ships in a campaign or whatever bits of territory you might control. You might hold some territory, but think of Hearthstones or Dark Fortresses, strategic locations, which does sound a lot like the Indomitus Crusade that I've read about at the very least. But the important thing is not just the fact that you have unit upgrade systems, but you have Lord and Hero upgrade systems and dedications for units. Which could be like, okay, you're a Space Marine of this chapter or this legion. Now, of course, it would be more strict in this respect because, you know, an Imperial Fist would be an Imperial Fist, undeniably so. But the way Warhammer 3 handles this, you have Undivided, which could be Grey Shields, and you can then dedicate to a specific god or a specific faction. And you have Be'lakor, Archeon, Kolek, and Sigvald, who are undivided, so they could be like, so that could be the neutral situation. And then you have your dedicated factions. You have like Valkia with Khorne and all that. Point is, replace Khorne with Imperial Fists, replace Nurgle with Ultramarines, and so on and so forth, and you could make that work quite well. So limited bits of territory, maybe vassals or allies with the Imperium, and that is how you would make it work within this context. I think it would be quite a great system. I think it would work quite well, because you do build up resources. Okay, let's dedicate it to a particular faction, and you do also have customization. Customization for lords. Your legendary lord is a fixed character, but you could actually make a customizable character as well. But I think if you're not going to have Guilliman as the faction leader for Space Marines, that would be silly. But your generic lords, your generic heroes can be customized. So let's say you recruit a captain or a lieutenant or sergeant as either army leaders or heroes, then you could have that customization. So pick one. Maybe when you pick it, you are forced to choose, okay, what's their legacy? In Warhammer 3, we do have some specific traits for Chaos heroes and lords that are already favoring one god over another. And the way this is balanced, so you don't just go with a completely diverse army and just smash everything in your path, the way this is balanced is through authority. So the more kinds of units they have that match together within an army and match together with the lord, the better it's going to be for those units. Now, maybe I'm crazy, but I think this kind of system would work exceptionally well for Space Marines. Of course, adapted to work for the Imperium as opposed to favoring one Chaos God over another or staying undivided. So undivided would be Grey Shields, Unnumbered Sons, and then you would have like the various Legion heritage choices over there. Though, again, maybe something you pick, maybe something like, okay, you're recruiting a unit, you could recruit a unit that's like a Grey Shield, but even that Grey Shield should have already should already be part of a certain heritage of a Legion. That's my perspective. Let me know what you guys think. Quistine signing out. That's all I have to say. Could work very badly, could be completely wrong, could end up with a Daemon Prince situation 2.0. And the problem with Warriors of Chaos, though, they're too damn strong for Warhammer 3, so you steamroll the campaign map. You have limited armies, but each of those armies is so ridiculously strong that no one's standing in your path. I know that fits with Space Marines, but I do think that we don't want to replicate that situation either. Stay tuned.